Hi everyone and welcome back. Houses, real estate, property, everyone in Australia loves real estate. It might have been the safest investment in this country over the last 150 years, but that does not mean that it's always going to be. Because I've got some truth for you in this video. You don't really own your land. This is not some kind of conspiracy or wild idea. This is what the law says. You hold it under license from the Crown. And newsflash, the Crown is not the King, not the Queen. It's got nothing to do with London anymore. It's the government itself. The Crown is the government. If you haven't watched my earlier videos on the Constitution, those changes, there's a link in the description below. Make sure you check them out so you can get your head around it. Every title, every deed, every block of land in this country, subject to the provisions of the Transfer of Land Act. And inside that act is maybe just an inconspicuous sentence that proves it never really is actually yours. See, under the legal fiction of the Torrens Title system, which was first introduced in South Australia in 1858 and then later it was adopted nationwide, all land is ultimately owned by the Crown in right of the state. What you own, if you like, is called an estate in fee simple. This is the highest form of tenure allowed under Australian law, but it still sits underneath the Crown. Section 42 of Victoria's Transfer of Land Act 1958 says that a certificate of title is conclusive proof of ownership, subject to encumbrances and to the provisions of this Act. And in plain English, your title is not ownership. All it is permission. You're allowed for now. So even if your mortgage is paid off, great. Even if the land's been in your family for the last 4 generations, one ministerial signature under the Land Acquisitions Act is all it actually takes to transfer your land back to the Crown. They don't need your approval, okay? They just need a justification. And this is where it gets interesting. Public interest, infrastructure, environmental management. The Crown can take it. They can compensate you on their terms, not on your terms, and there's nothing that you can actually do to stop it. See, the great Australian dream was obviously built on a promise of private ownership, but when the fine print says the government still holds the root title, how private is it really? See, power's being modernised, digitised, and most importantly, centralised. And one database entry can decide whether you actually still own your home tomorrow or the next day. So they don't need to storm your property with bulldozers and just come in and take it off you. They don't need to do that. All they need is their little database with your name on it. And over the last 10 years or so, every Australian state's just quietly abolished paper titles. You no longer hold the proof of ownership in your physical hands. The paper. The government's got it now. Victoria's Transfer of Land Act of 2014 made the electronic lodgement network compulsory. So New South Wales, Land and Property Information New South Wales migrated all records into PEXA, and PEXA is a private company operating under the Australian Registrar's National Electronic Conveyancing Council. This is called RNEC. That means every title in the country now lives inside a digital registry that can be frozen, amended, revoked by authorised access. No paper, no witness, no warning. So the title that you used to maybe keep in a fire safe at home is now a line of code on a centralised server that you'll never actually see. All it takes, one system glitch, one cyber attack, one policy change, and your ownership could be, let's say, pending verification. Now, compulsory acquisition. Governments don't call it seizure, they call it resumption or acquisition. So under the Land Acquisition Just Terms Compensation Act 1991 and all of its equivalent laws, property can be taken for a public purpose. But just terms is defined by the same government that is actually taking it. Market value is rarely paid once you consider legal costs, relocation, stress, that sort of thing. Ask the families removed for the West Connex motorway in Sydney or the North East Link in Melbourne. Their titles said ownership. The law said otherwise. When the state decides it needs your land, you don't negotiate, you just have to comply. You used to be able to object to developments that affected your property, but under Vic Smart and Victoria, some planning applications are approved within 10 days. No third party, no objections allowed. The stated aim that they say is efficiency, but the effect is to remove public oversight and fast track whatever aligns with government planning strategy. This isn't just red tape reduction, it's a transfer of power from the property owner to the bureaucracy. Maybe we should follow the thread up a bit. Let's have a look up the chain to the global organisations with policies that have quietly steered these reforms and why they all lead to the same destination. People think this is conspiracy, but they say you will own nothing. And did you think that they were joking? Did you actually think that this was some kind of joke? What's happening to your property rights in Australia isn't unique. This is part of a coordinated, worldwide shift. It's a move away from private ownership toward managed access, we'll call it. The language is careful. Sustainable development, urban efficiency, public benefit. But behind those words is one outcome, and that is less individual control, more centralised authority. In 2016, the World Economic Forum released its Agenda 2030. All right, what do they say? Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, I have no privacy, and life has never been better. And this wasn't some kind of joke or satire, it was a vision of shared economy ownership where access replaces possession. And that message, you will own nothing and be happy, has become the philosophical banner for policies now being written into planning frameworks across the entire world. And Australia signed onto the UN Agenda 2030 back in 2015. Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, calls for inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable human settlements. It sounds very noble, but the policy translation is densification, urban consolidation and reuse of underutilised land. Open up Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050 and you'll see the same vocabulary. Compact city, 20-minute neighbourhoods or whatever they are, restructure underutilised land assets. Those phrases come straight from United Nations Habitat policy papers. This isn't conspiracy, it's just policy alignment. State planning authorities use these documents to justify their rezonings, the compulsory acquisitions and infill redevelopment, all in the name of sustainability. The public hear green planning. What it really means is greater government control over land use. Add to that the rise of ESG, environmental, social and governance standards. See, property developers and banks now are pressured to lend and build only within ESG targets, carbon scores, energy ratings, density quotas. And the result is, if your home or project fails the metrics, the specified metrics, or your finance dries up, your ownership becomes conditional on compliance. The market isn't free anymore, it's scored. So when digital titles, planning law and global policy all align, they've created a single system of control. And your property sits inside a national registry governed by state legislation, framed by UN directives and funded through ESG-linked finance. None of that requires any referendum, it just requires you not to notice, as long as you don't know, yeah? So global policy gives the language, but the mechanism of control lives in our own legislation. See, the Crown may have changed in 1973 to 1986, but in law it still owns every square metre of land in this country. And when government's the Crown, the power to reclassify or reclaim land becomes almost limitless. Under every state land statute, Crown land means land owned by the Crown in right of the state, which simply means the state government itself. See, in Victoria, the Land Act 1958 vests all land in the state in the Crown. The Crown Land Act of 1978 then allows ministers to reserve, revoke, or repurpose that land for any public purpose. Similar provisions in New South Wales, Crown Land Management Act, Queensland, Land Act 1994. So in practice, these acts let governments sell, lease, or redeclare Crown land without public vote. One Gazette notice and a minister's signature, boom, legal transfer. The Land Acquisition Acts across each state extend that power to infrastructure, environment, or community need. None of those terms are actually really precisely defined, which means that almost anything can qualify as a public purpose. Maybe a highway, a renewable zone, a biodiversity offset, or even an urban renewal corridor. And once the declaration's made, ownership reverts instantly to the Crown. Compensation will follow later, and it'll be on their terms. And here's where it gets a little bit more sophisticated. The modern registry, run through PEXA and supervised by this RNEC, is technically a private company acting under statutory license. The government owns the data, but the company manages the access. That means the proof of your ownership isn't just in government hands, it's actually held within a commercial system bound by service contracts, not constitutional rights. Control is no longer just political, it's profitable. Every resumption, rezoning, or restriction rests on the same phrase, in the public interest. But there's no single statute defining what that actually means. Courts defer to Parliament, parliaments defer to policy, and policy, increasingly, defers to international frameworks. And that chain of deference is how control travels from Geneva right through to your backyard without ever breaking a single law. So the architecture of control is built entirely within legal boundaries. That's what makes this all so brilliant and oh so very dangerous. Now the next phase of control won't come through land law. It'll come through compliance. Because when you can't legally seize what people own, you just make ownership maybe too hard to keep. All around the world, governments are tying property rights to environmental performance. In the European Union from 2030, residential homes must meet strict efficiency standards before they can be sold or rented. Fail, and the property's effectively frozen on the market. Australia is already heading in the same direction. So the National Construction Code of 22 and the National Energy Performance Strategy of 23 push for net zero aligned housing standards, and future reviews are expected to tie those ratings to property transactions. It starts as green policy, it ends as conditional ownership. If your home doesn't comply, you can't insure it, you can't sell it, you can't rent it, and eventually you can't even live in it. The banks and insurers are well and truly already on board. Under ASIC's ESG disclosure framework, lenders must report their portfolio emissions. That means mortgages on older, non-compliant homes count against their environmental targets. Some European banks have already started refusing loans on low-rated properties. Australian institutions are signalling the same, and the result? Finance becomes a filter. If you don't fit the new compliance class or the compliance requirements, the system's going to price you out. No ban, no confiscation, just rules that make you, let's say, disappear from the market. At the same time, planning law is merging with digital tracking. We've got smart city frameworks, link land data, energy use, and identity systems, all in the name of efficiency. The National Digital ID Bill lays the groundwork for a single verification layer across government financial services. So once ownership and identity are fused together, every transaction, buying, selling, leasing, paying rates, it all passes through a government-verified digital gate. And that's how physical freedom becomes programmable. If compliance defines access, then ownership no longer protects you, it just measures your obedience. When compliance becomes ownership, the state no longer needs to confiscate anything at all. It simply regulates you into surrender. Your right to own land quietly becomes a license to occupy, renewed in condition of conformity. The home that once represented independence becomes a monitored asset inside an environmental credit system. And that's how the great Australian dream turns into the great Australian lease. See, over the last 150 years, we built a nation on the belief that ownership meant freedom. But freedom without the control of your own property is an illusion, isn't it? The laws are written, the systems are built, and the transition is well and truly underway. The question now isn't really whether they're going to take your home, it's whether in the end you'll still be allowed to keep it. So now you can see one of the most powerful illusions in modern life, the belief that ownership equals freedom. But when you trace the laws, when you look at the titles, when you look at the policies and the global alignments, you start to see, in fact, you can't really ignore the pattern. It's control dressed up as protection. The Crown isn't a monarch anymore, it's the state itself. The registry is no longer a record, it's just a layer. The law doesn't protect your rights, it defines the limits of your permission. And the same government that calls itself your guardian is quietly rewriting the conditions of what you're allowed to own, build, and keep. See, every reform looks harmless in isolation, and together they form a system where ownership survives in name only. And we can't stop progress, but we can expose it. We can't control every law, but we can understand them. We can read them. We can learn them. Because the one thing that this system can't survive is awareness. And it relies on you believing that the fine print doesn't matter, that your title means security, that your government serves you, not itself. And the moment you actually start questioning that, which you should, the illusion is exposed. So before you scroll past this video, open up your contract, look at the document that proves you own your own home. Then ask yourself, if freedom depends on permission, was I ever really free at all? The great Australian dream doesn't die when they take your house. It dies when you forget who actually really owns it. Thanks very much for watching. If this video's opened your eyes, share it far and wide. Comment what you've seen in your own town, acquisitions, rezonings, digital title issues. The more of us that know, the harder it is for them to pretend that we don't. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.